Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we're going to dive into a topic that's kind of an invisible trap in the world of data, something that can completely warp the results of surveys and polls. It's called non-response bias, and it is a hidden flaw that can lead us to some seriously wrong conclusions. We're about to pull back the curtain and see exactly how it works. You know the feeling, right? We've all been there. You see a headline about some new poll, you look at the numbers, and you just think to yourself, wait, who did they even ask? That can't be right. It just doesn't seem to match the reality you see around you. Well, that gut feeling you have, it might just be pointing directly at the problem we're talking about today. And the culprit, more often than not, is something called non-response bias. The best way to think about it is as a ghost in the data. See, it's this error that creeps in when the people who hang up the phone or ignore the survey email have fundamentally different views than the people who actually answer. And that raises a huge question. How in the world do you measure the opinions of people who refuse to talk to you? So here's how we're going to break it all down and tackle this ghost. First, we'll look at the poll's hidden trap. Then we're going to talk about checking the blueprint of a survey. After that, we'll uncover a really cool tool from South Korea, their secret weapon against bias. Then we'll explore a clever method called listening to latecomers. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with why any of this really matters. Let's dive in. All right, first up, checking the blueprint. I want you to think about this like you're a construction manager. You have the original architectural plan for a building, and then you have the building itself. We're basically doing the same thing, comparing the plan for who we wanted to survey versus who actually answered, to see if there are any cracks in the foundation. And to check that blueprint, we've got two main tools in our toolbox. The first is called ratio difference. This helps us answer the big picture question, is the whole thing warped? The second is the achievement rate. This one lets us zoom in and ask something more specific. Are we totally missing a key group of people? Together, they give us a really clear picture of any potential bias. Okay, so let's put ratio difference to the test with an example. Let's say we know that women make up 51% of the total population we're studying, but when we look at our survey respondents, only 45% are women. Well, that's a 6 percentage point gap. And according to most research standards, anything over 5 points, like this, tells you there's a moderate bias. The whole picture is already a little bit skewed. But that's the big picture, right? Sometimes the real story, the really severe problem, is buried in the details. So what if I told you that for one very specific group, women between the ages of 18 and 20 in the Gyeonggi/Incheon region of Korea, the survey only achieved this number, 36%. What does that even mean? Well, this chart puts that 36% into perspective. See, an achievement rate this low means we only managed to reach about a third of the people we needed from that very specific group to make our sample accurate. And that, right there, lands us deep in the severe bias zone. It means the voices of these young women are almost completely missing from our data. Finding these cracks is one thing, but how do we actually prevent them from happening in the first place? Well, that brings us to a truly game-changing tool from South Korea called the relief number system. It is basically a pollster's secret weapon against this exact problem. Now, here's why this is so powerful. Mobile carriers give pollsters anonymized phone numbers that are linked to basic demographic data like age and gender. And this is the key. For the first time, researchers can actually see the characteristics of the people who don't pick up the phone. It means they can directly compare who answered to who didn't. So imagine a pollster starts with a perfect plan. They use this relief number system to build a sample that is perfectly balanced by age, exactly 20% from each age group. This is the blueprint, right? This is the ideal survey they're aiming for. But then, this is who actually answers the phone. Look at that. The group of people in their 20s, which was supposed to be 20% of the sample, is now just 10%. And at the same time, the older groups are way overrepresented. The difference between the plan and the reality is just, wow, it's stark. This is a perfect visual of bias in action. And this chart shows us exactly why that huge shift happened. The response rate for folks in their 60s is a whopping 45%, but for those in their 20s, it's only 15%. That means older individuals are literally 3 times more likely to participate in the survey. That is a massive systemic bias baked right into the data. But here's the magic, right? This data isn't just for looking at, it's for doing something. While a survey is still running, pollsters can see in real time that the 20s group is falling behind, and they can make more calls to them. And after the survey is done, they can use this data to apply what are called statistical weights, which basically lets them digitally turn up the volume on the opinions of the groups that were underrepresented, rebalancing the final result. Okay, but what if you don't have a fancy, high-tech system like that? That brings us to our third method, a really clever approach called listening to latecomers. It's all about trying to hear a whisper from that silent group by focusing on the people who were the hardest to get a hold of. The whole thing is built on a really clever and, when you think about it, kind of obvious assumption. People who answer on the first or second call, they're the early responders, easy to reach. People who only answer after, say, 10 attempts, they're the late responders, much harder to reach. And the people you never reach at all, the non-responders, they're the hardest. So the key idea here is that those late responders are probably a pretty good proxy for the people who never answer at all. Let's see how this plays out in a political survey. Among the early responders, the easy-to-reach folks, 40% identify as progressive and only 30% as moderate. But now look at the late responders. The progressive share drops all the way down to 25%, while the share of moderates jumps up to 45%. That is a huge shift. So, what's this telling us? Well, if the late responders are a window into the minds of the people who never answer, it strongly suggests that the true population has way more moderates than the initial survey results showed. The easy-to-reach progressives answered first, and that completely skewed the initial picture. Okay, so we've looked at 3 different ways to spot this ghost in the data. Now, let's zoom out and talk about why any of this matters. Because getting this stuff right isn't just an academic exercise. It's the difference between making good decisions and really, really bad ones. Because once you understand this concept, you stop taking every poll and every statistic at face value. You realize a flawed poll can lead to a surprise election result. You know that flawed market research can cause a billion-dollar product to completely fail. You become a much more critical, informed analyst of the world around you, and you start asking the right questions about the data that shapes it. So I'm going to leave you with this question. The next time you see a poll, don't just look at the numbers for who answered. Think about the methods we talked about today and ask yourself a different question. What about the people who didn't answer? Because their silence might just be the most important part of the entire story. Thanks for watching.